Functions are basically a way to break a program into smaller parts. So what I mean by that is the programs we've been doing so far are more procedural. So in other words, you start at the top of your program and you just kind of work down line by line. The programs we've had so far, we might have main function, and then we have some code in here, so we have some lines of code. And the program is just going to work through the code, right? If we have an if statement or a loop, it might skip a few things, but in general, it's just going to step through this code in the order that it was written. So what we can do with functions is, and I'll just put functions here to specify that's what we're talking about. And this is chapter 6. So functions allow you to do modular programming. And so basically what this means is that we're breaking the program into smaller parts. So this breaks the program into smaller parts. So if you're working in a team, so each part of the program is written as a sort of standalone or separate unit. There's a term for that, divide and conquer. So repeatability, like you can take a chunk of code and repeat it like more than once pretty easily. So repeatability, split code into functional groups. And just to come back to this repeatability, one thing that would go with that is reusability. So we can reuse parts of code without having to rewrite it. And as you move further into programming, you'll find that not only does it become reusable within the program that you're currently writing, but you can use it in other programs as well. So you can take chunks of code and reuse them in your own program, but you can also reuse them in other programs. So it makes your code reusable. Easier to read. It makes our main function extremely easy to read because we'll see later that you can name your functions pretty specific things. So then your main function just kind of reads like what your program is, like output menu, get input. So that makes it really easy to read. Another thing is it helps with maintainability. So improves maintainability. This makes sense. I mean, if your program is split into smaller chunks, if you just need to update one thing or one part of it, it's much easier to go update a function than it is to try and update a bunch of lines in your code. So we've already seen functions, like we've already seen this. So this is our main function. We've also seen this. It takes two numbers. So we send this function two numbers and it gives us back the exponent. We've seen this function and we've seen this. So we've already seen functions, we just haven't written functions yet. So that's what we're going to learn how to do now, is write functions. So in order to write functions, first of all, we need to look at the structure of a function. So let's look at the int main function just because that's what we're sort of familiar with. So we've seen this a lot. I mean, we've been writing code with the main function. And let's just say that this has a cout statement in here. So hello world. And then the return 0. This line, or this right here, is called the function header. So every function is going to have a function header. And this right here, this int, is the function return type. So this is the return type. So for instance, with this main function, it has int main because it's returning an integer. And that's why we need this return 0 right here, because it's returning 0. 0 is an integer. It's returning 0 when the function is done running. So basically when you get to the end of your program, the end of the main function, your program is done and it's going to return 0. So the main function is going to return 0. Then all of this stuff in here, so everything in the curly braces is the function body. So one thing, coming back to this type, if your function returns a type, that type has to be indicated. So like this main function is returning an integer, so we have to specify that it's an integer. A function could also return a double, a character, a string. So, and that gets to the void function. So if a function doesn't return a value, its type is void. So if a function isn't returning anything, it's void. And then, so we have what the function's returning, and then the name of the function. So I'm just going to call this print heading. And also this right here, so where it says main and then right before the parentheses, that's the name of your function. So this function here, I'm naming it print heading, curly braces. So this is the function header, the print heading, and then I have the body in between these curly braces. So since this is called print heading, it's just going to print something out. So let's do C out, and let's just say this is printing out monthly sales. So, and it's not actually printing any numbers or anything, it's literally printing the words monthly sales. So we have this function void print heading. Let's actually change this to display message. So remember, we can name the function anything we want. And I'm going to call it display message because I want to pretend like there's a lot more text in here. So let's say that we're running a program and we want to display a paragraph or so to the user. We might do that in a function rather than putting all of that text in our main function. So let's pretend like this is a big long message that we're displaying to the user. So then what we can do, so let's say we have this function, and then we have our main function, and this is going to be, so let's say that our main function has, well, let's say that we just go into the main function and we want to display this message to the user. So we're going to call this function with just the name, and then just the parentheses. And we're going to see later like functions where you might need to put something in the parentheses, but for right now we're just going to do it like this because basically we're not sending any variables to the function. So what this is going to do is your program is always going to start at int main. So the C++ programs always start at the main function. So it's going to come in here, start running, and it gets to this display message. And what it's going to do, and it might help to put a couple things in here just that it's doing in between this. But let's say that we have this code and it's displaying, we have this display message. So what this is going to do is go up here to this function, to the display message function. It's going to start running that function, and it's going to run the display message function until it reaches the end, and then it's going to jump back down to wherever it left off in the calling function. In this case, the calling function is the main function, but we're going to see in a minute that we can also call functions from other functions. So basically it's going to, when it gets to the function call, so this is called the function call, it's going to go up to your function, run the function. When it gets to the end of the function, it's going to come back down to wherever it left off in your calling function. And I want to point out a couple things. First of all, on the function header, notice how there's no semicolon after the parentheses. So you want to make sure you don't put a semicolon there. But then on our function call, we do have a semicolon. And so let's go look at an actual program. So let's look at the comments, because this program has pretty good comments. So it says this program has two functions, main and display message. And then it says the definition of function display message. So whenever you have functions, it's a really good idea to put a comment above your function specifying what it does. We haven't really been doing this specifically because we've really only had one function, the main function. So we've just been putting a comment at the top of our code that says what the program does, and that's really saying what the main function does. But now we're going to have more functions, so we're going to want to comment before each function specifying what the function does. So this says the definition of function display message. This function displays a message. And then we have our void display message. So then it just says hello from the function display message. And then this specifies that this is the main function. So in the main function we have hello from main. So this is going to start running the main function. It's going to see out hello from main. So it's going to print hello from main to the console. And then we're calling this function display message. So it gets to the display message, goes up and runs this function. So it's going to print hello from function display message to the console. And then after it runs that, it's going to come back down here to and display back in main function again. The other thing is, so this function call, we just have the function call. It's just going to call that function once. Function calls can be used pretty much anywhere. So any of the programming we've already been doing, function calls can be put in loops, if statements, switch statements. So if you start thinking about all of the places you can use function calls, functions become really powerful.